Welcome to Scared Stories for a Rainy Night. As a reminder before we begin, there are minimum ads in this entire video, so you can relax, sleep, and listen to the video without interruptions. I really hope you enjoy, and lastly, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you. Now let's begin. My name is Julia Carter, a 28-year-old historian with a passion for uncovering the forgotten stories of the past. For years, I had been captivated by the tales surrounding Harlan Manor, an ancient estate that stood on the outskirts of my hometown. Locals whispered of strange occurrences, ghostly apparitions, and the tragic fate of the Harlan family, who had vanished without a trace over a century ago. When I received an invitation to research the manor for a documentary, I jumped at the opportunity. The chance to explore its crumbling halls and delve into its dark history was irresistible. Armed with my camera, notebook, and an old family journal I had found in the town archives, I arrived at Harlan Manor on a dreary autumn morning, the sky heavy with clouds. The manor loomed ahead, draped in ivy and shadow. As I approached the grand entrance, I felt a chill run down my spine. The heavy front doors creaked open, revealing a dark foyer filled with dust and remnants of a once elegant life. I switched on my flashlight, illuminating the faded wallpaper and the grand staircase that spiraled into darkness. I began my exploration, taking notes and snapping photos of the decaying beauty around me. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and memories, and every creak of the floorboards echoed through the empty halls. As I moved deeper into the manor, I felt an inexplicable presence, as if unseen eyes were watching my every move. The journal I had brought with me belonged to Elizabeth Harlan, the last known resident of the manor. Her entries were filled with tales of sorrow, loss, and a growing darkness that had enveloped the estate. I found myself drawn to her words, eager to uncover the truth about what had happened to her family. In one of the dusty sitting rooms, I discovered an old portrait of Elizabeth and her family. They looked happy, with bright smiles and hopeful eyes. But as I studied the painting more closely, I noticed something unsettling. The shadows around them seemed to twist and curl, almost as if they were alive. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing my flashlight. Panic surged through me as I fumbled to turn it back on. When the beam finally flickered to life, I froze. Standing in the doorway was a figure, a woman in a flowing white gown, her face obscured by shadows. "Help me," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart raced as I took a step back. Was this Elizabeth Harlan? Or was it merely a figment of my imagination? "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. "I am Elizabeth," she said, her voice filled with desperation. "I need you to find out what happened to my family. We are trapped in this place, bound by a darkness that consumes us." Determined to help, I followed her as she glided through the manor, leading me to a door at the end of the hallway. It creaked open, revealing a hidden room filled with dusty books and strange artifacts. In the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror, its glass tarnished and cracked. "Look into the mirror," Elizabeth urged. "It holds the key to our fate." I approached cautiously, my heart pounding as I peered into the glass. At first, all I saw was my reflection, but then the surface rippled, revealing a vision of the past. I gasped as I witnessed a scene unfold. a lavish party taking place in the very room I stood in. Laughter filled the air, and the Harlan family danced joyfully, unaware of the shadows lurking just beyond their celebration. But then the atmosphere shifted. Dark figures emerged from the corners of the room, their forms twisting and writhing as they closed in on the family. The laughter turned to screams, and the vision faded, leaving me breathless. "What was that?" I asked, trembling. "The darkness came for us," Elizabeth replied, her eyes filled with sorrow. "We were cursed, trapped in this manner by the very shadows that consumed our joy. You must help me break the curse." I felt a surge of determination. "I'll do everything I can," I promised, my voice steady despite the fear that coursed through me. Elizabeth pointed to a dusty chest in the corner. "Inside, you'll find the journal of my mother, Eleanor. She wrote of the darkness that haunted us, the source of our despair. You must read it and discover the truth." I opened the chest and carefully unfolded the fragile pages of Eleanor's journal. The entries detailed the family's descent into madness, the strange happenings that plagued the manor, and the terrible price they had paid for seeking power beyond their understanding. As I read, I felt the weight of their sorrow pressing down on me. "The darkness was summoned by a ritual," I murmured, piecing together the fragments of their story. "You were trying to gain control over it, but it backfired." "Yes," Elizabeth confirmed, her voice filled with regret. "We believed we could harness its power, but instead, it consumed us. The shadows took my family, and now they seek to take you as well." A chill raced through me as I glanced around the room. The air grew heavy, and I could feel the shadows creeping closer, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. I needed to act quickly. "Elizabeth, how do I break the curse?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "You must confront the darkness," she replied, her form flickering as the shadows pressed in. "You must reclaim the light that was stolen from us. Only then can we be free." With renewed determination, I took a deep breath and focused on the mirror. "Show me the darkness," I shouted, my voice echoing in the room. The glass rippled again, revealing a swirling vortex of shadows, a mass of despair and anger that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. "Face it," Elizabeth urged, her voice growing faint. "You are stronger than it." I stepped closer to the mirror, feeling the pull of the darkness. "I will not be afraid," I declared, my heart racing. I reached out to touch the glass, and as my fingers made contact, the shadows surged forward, trying to drag me into their depths. "No," I screamed, forcing my will against the darkness. "I am here to free you." With one final push, I summoned every ounce of strength within me and shouted, "I command you to release the Harlan family. I reject your hold over this place." The shadows writhed in response, their screams echoing in my ears. I felt a surge of energy, a light emanating from within me, pushing back against the darkness. The mirror cracked, and with each shard that fell, the shadows screamed louder. As the last pieces of the mirror shattered, a blinding light enveloped the room. I shielded my eyes, and when I opened them again, the darkness had dissipated. Elizabeth stood before me, her form now radiant, free from the shadows that had once bound her. "You did it!" she exclaimed, tears of joy streaming down her face. "You freed us." The room felt lighter. The oppressive weight lifted as the lingering shadows melted away. Elizabeth's family began to appear around her, their faces filled with gratitude and relief. They joined hands, forming a circle of light, and together they turned to me. "Thank you, Julia," Elizabeth said, her voice filled with warmth. "You have given us the gift of freedom." As the family spirits began to fade, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had helped them reclaim their lives, their joy, and their legacy. The manor, once a place of darkness, now stood as a testament to their resilience. I left Harlan Manor with a newfound sense of purpose, ready to share their story with the world. The documentary I would create would not only tell the tale of their suffering, but also celebrate the triumph of light over darkness. And as I drove away, I glanced back at the manor, now bathed in sunlight, knowing that the whispers of the past had finally found their peace. I'm not one for superstitions or ghost stories. As a young architect living alone in a spacious house in the quiet suburbs of St. Lambert, my concerns were usually about deadlines and design flaws, not bumps in the night. But everything changed when I bought the old Victorian house at the end of Hawthorne Lane. The house was a steel, 3 stories tall, complete with a turret and gabled roof, surrounded by a wild, unkempt garden. It had been on the market for years, overlooked by other buyers, because of the tragic story associated with it. The previous owner, Mrs. Evelyn Harlow, an eccentric recluse, was found dead in her bed, her face frozen in a silent scream. No one knew why, and no one cared to ask. But I wasn't bothered. It was just a house, after all. The first few weeks passed uneventfully. I spent my days drafting plans and my nights tinkering with renovations, trying to breathe new life into the faded grandeur of the place. The only oddity was the constant feeling of being watched, but I chalked it up to the house's imposing presence and my overactive imagination. One night, after a long day, I slumped on the couch in the dimly lit living room, sipping on a cup of coffee. My eyes were heavy, but my mind was restless. I glanced at the old grandfather clock by the window. It was 2:17 a.m. A storm raged outside, rain tapping rhythmically against the windows, the occasional flash of lightning casting eerie shadows on the walls. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard it. A faint creaking sound, like someone stepping on an old wooden floorboard. My heart jumped. I strained to listen, but the sound had stopped. It was probably the house settling, I told myself. This place was old, after all. But then it came again, louder this time, from upstairs. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I grabbed my phone, using its flashlight to navigate through the dark house. I tiptoed up the creaky staircase, each step feeling like a betrayal of silence. The noise seemed to be coming from the master bedroom, Mrs. Harlow's old room, a place I hadn't touched since moving in. The door was slightly ajar, swaying gently as if nudged by a breeze. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the house. I shone my light around. Everything was in its place, covered in dust and draped in cobwebs. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the dusty wooden floor were fresh footprints, bare and wet, leading from the door to the bed. They stopped abruptly at the side of the bed, as if someone had been standing there, staring at the empty mattress. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't been in this room since I moved in, and I certainly hadn't walked around barefoot. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I locked the door and retreated downstairs, convincing myself that I was overreacting, that there had to be a logical explanation. I decided to sleep on the couch that night, too unnerved to go back to my own bed. Just as I was starting to drift off again, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the hallway. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, my pulse quickening. The sound was moving closer, echoing through the house. It was deliberate, almost like footsteps. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight again. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the hallway. At first, I saw nothing, but then, at the far end, something moved. A figure shrouded in darkness was standing there, watching me. My heart skipped a beat. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice wavering. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, motionless. I took a step forward, trying to get the better look, but my flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. In a panic, I scrambled to turn it back on, but when I did, the figure was gone. I rushed to the front door, fumbling with the locks, desperate to get out of the house. As I yanked the door open, a blast of cold air hit me, and I nearly stumbled over something on the floor. There, lying on the threshold, was an old photograph. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was faded and yellowed with age, but I recognized the room in the picture. It was the master bedroom, Mrs. Harlow's room. And standing beside the bed, with a haunting smile on her face, was Mrs. Harlow herself. But it wasn't her that sent chills down my spine. Standing next to her, holding her hand, was a man. A man whose face I had never seen, but whose silhouette matched the figure that had been in my hallway moments before. I bolted out of the house and didn't look back. I called the police from my car, barely able to explain what had happened. When they arrived, they searched the house from top to bottom, but found nothing out of the ordinary. No footprints, no photograph, no sign of anyone else. They tried to reassure me, saying it was probably just a bad dream or stress from working too much. But I knew what I had seen. I moved out the next day, leaving the house and its secrets behind. A few weeks later, I received a package in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled on the front in shaky handwriting. Inside was the photograph, the one I had found on the doorstep. But this time, there was a note attached. It read, "You should have stayed. He doesn't like to be alone." I never went back to Hawthorne Lane, and every time I see a shadow out of the corner of my eye, I wonder if he finally found someone new to keep him company. My name is Clara Hargrove, and I'm an archivist at the local historical society in Willow Creek, a quaint little town nestled between dense forests and rolling hills. My days are spent sifting through dusty documents and forgotten relics, but there's one particular place that haunts my thoughts: my childhood home on Maplewood Lane. After my mother passed last autumn, I inherited the old Victorian that had been in our family for generations. Though it was filled with memories, the thought of returning to the house sent chills down my spine. The creaking floorboards, the whispering walls, it was as if the house held onto its secrets, and I was terrified of what they might be. Despite my fears, I knew I needed to sort through my mother's belongings and prepare the house for sale. So, one rainy afternoon in early October, I drove to Maplewood Lane, the sky a brooding gray that seemed to mirror my dread. As I stepped inside, the familiar musty smell enveloped me, stirring up memories of laughter and warmth, but also the shadows that lurked in corners. Each room felt like a time capsule, frozen in a moment of my childhood. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows, I began to hear the whispers. They started quietly, like the rustle of leaves, and then grew louder, echoing through the empty halls. I spun around, convinced I'd find someone behind me, but the house was still. I shook off the uneasy and began sorting through my mother's belongings. I discovered old photographs, yellow-ed letters, and a dusty journal filled with her elegant handwriting. As I flipped through the pages, I found entries detailing strange occurrences in the house. Flickering lights, doors opening and closing on their own, and the persistent feeling of being watched. My heart raced as I read her final entry. The whispers have become clearer. They call my name. A shiver ran down my spine. I had brushed off my mother's tales as mere figments of her imagination, but now they felt ominously real. I decided to lock up for the night, but as I turned to leave, I heard it again. A soft, melodic whisper, gentle yet insistent, echoing from the attic. Against my better judgment, curiosity pulled me upstairs. Each step creaked beneath my weight, and the air grew colder. The attic door stood ajar, as if inviting me in. I hesitated, but pushed it open, the hinges protesting with a groan. Dust motes danced in the dim light, and there, in the center of the room, stood an old music box. It was an exquisite piece, intricately carved with flowers and vines, but it was the faint, eerie melody that drew me closer. As I reached for it, the whispers intensified, swirling around me like a tempest. I felt a cold breeze brush past me, and the attic seemed to contract, closing in on me. Suddenly, the music box sprang to life, its lid opening on its own. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, but with it came an overwhelming sense of dread. I stumbled back, nearly falling as the whispers crescendoed into frantic voices, each one calling my name. Clara, Clara. I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. Panic surged through me. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but the voices drowned out my cries. In desperation, I looked back at the music box, its melody growing louder, more insistent. I had to silence it. I lunged for the music box, but just as I reached it, I heard a voice, my mother's voice, clear and haunting. Clara, don't! But it was too late. I smashed it closed, the melody cutting off abruptly. The room fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Then, the door swung open. I stumbled out, gasping for air, my heart racing. As I fled down the stairs, I glanced back to see the attic door slowly closing, the whispers fading into nothingness. Once outside, I collapsed onto the porch, the cool night air calming my racing heart. I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror, my childhood home shrinking in the distance. But then, something in the mirror caught my eye. A figure standing in the attic window. It was my mother, her gaze fixed on me, a sorrowful smile on her lips. And then, just like that, she disappeared into the darkness. Months later, as I prepared to sell the house, I decided to check the attic one last time. The music box was gone, but in its place lay a note written in my mother's delicate hand. "Thank you for freeing me, dear Clara. But remember, some echoes never truly fade." I shivered, realizing that the whispers might have been her way of calling for help all along. And as I stepped back down the stairs, I swore I could still hear her voice, lingering just beyond the walls of Maplewood Lane. My name is Sarah Whitmore, and I've spent the last few years as a freelance journalist in the small town of Hollow Creek. Nestled deep in the woods, it was a place that seemed frozen in time, filled with quaint shops and friendly faces. But beneath its charming exterior lay a history steeped in darkness, a history that I was determined to uncover. When I first moved here, I heard whispers of an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. The Hollow Creek Asylum had been closed for decades after a series of mysterious disappearances, and the locals avoided it like the plague. Intrigued, I decided to investigate. My editor had challenged me to write a piece about the town's haunted history, and I knew that the asylum would be the perfect focal point. On a misty Saturday morning, I gathered my camera and notebook and set off for the asylum. The air was thick with humidity, and a sense of foreboding hung over me as I approached the crumbling structure. Vines crept up the stone walls, and broken windows stared out like hollow eyes, watching my every move. I took a deep breath and pushed open the rusty gate, stepping into the overgrown yard. The front door creaked ominously as I entered, a wave of stale air hitting me like a ghostly embrace. The interior was a labyrinth of decaying rooms and dark hallways, each filled with remnants of the past: rusted medical equipment, tattered patient records, and faded photographs of the patients who once called this place home. I felt a chill run down my spine. As I made my way through the asylum, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water and the occasional scuttle of a rat. I set up my camera, snapping photos of the hauntingly beautiful decay, and tried to focus on my work. But the deeper I went, the more I felt the presence of something sinister lurking just beyond my vision. I brushed it off as nerves, but when I heard a soft whisper echo through the halls, I froze. "Help me," it called, barely audible yet unmistakably real. My heart raced as I turned, searching for the source. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling against the silence. No response. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But as I pressed on, the whispers grew stronger, more insistent. "Help me, please." I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing against the cold concrete floors. It led me to a small room at the end of a dark corridor. Hesitating at the threshold, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty, except for a single dusty chair in the center and a cracked mirror hanging on the wall. As I approached the mirror, the whispers intensified, swirling around me like a whirlwind. I caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection, a shadow darting behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I could feel panic rising in my chest. Suddenly, the mirror fogged up, and words began to form in the condensation. "Save us." My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my palms against the cool glass, staring at the message. The air felt charged, and I could sense a heavy presence closing in around me. I took a step back, and the whispers became a cacophony, pleading, begging for release. "Help us! We are trapped!" My instinct screamed at me to run, but something compelled me to stay. I had to know what had happened here. Gripping my camera tightly, I turned back to the mirror, determined to uncover the truth. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the emptiness. The fog cleared, revealing a series of faces, anguished, terrified, and desperate. They faded in and out, each one more haunting than the last. Then, one face caught my attention, a young woman with sorrowful eyes. "They won't let us go," she whispered, her voice a mere breath. "You must find the heart of the asylum." "What do you mean?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Find the basement, the heart. It holds the key," she urged, before her image vanished, leaving only a lingering chill. I stood frozen for a moment, processing what I had just witnessed. The basement. I had to find it. Without hesitation, I left the room and made my way back through the asylum, searching for any signs that would lead me to the basement. After what felt like an eternity of navigating through dark hallways and broken doors, I finally found a staircase leading down. Taking a deep breath, I descended into the darkness, the air growing colder with each step. The flickering light from my flashlight illuminated the narrow passage, revealing damp walls and remnants of old storage. At the bottom, I entered a large room that felt like a tomb. It was filled with old medical equipment, but at the center stood a large, rusted cage, its bars twisted and broken. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls. "You're here. You found it. Help us." I approached the cage, my heart racing. Inside, I saw more faces, contorted in anguish, their eyes pleading for freedom. I felt a surge of emotion, and tears stung my eyes. "What happened to you?" I whispered. "The experiments? The darkness? We were forgotten," the voices cried in unison. "You must end this. Break the curse." Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to remain calm. I needed to help them. I scanned the room, searching for something, anything, that could provide answers. That's when I spotted an old ledger lying on a table, covered in dust. I rushed over and opened it, revealing pages filled with horrific accounts of experiments conducted on the patients. The asylum had been known for its controversial treatments, but it had spiraled into madness. The last entry sent chills down my spine. "The heart of the asylum is the source of our power. We must feed it. The darkness grows stronger." I slammed the book shut, my mind racing. The darkness was feeding off the anguish of those trapped here. I needed to stop it. I looked back at the cage, the faces watching me with a mix of hope and despair. "How do I break the curse?" I asked desperately. "Destroy the heart," the young woman's voice echoed once more. "It is hidden. Find the source." With renewed determination, I searched the room for any clues. My eyes fell upon a large, ornate box in the corner, its surface adorned with intricate carvings. I felt a pull toward it, a primal instinct urging me to open it. As I approached, the whispers reached a fever pitch, mingling with a deep, throbbing pulse emanating from the box. My name is David Sinclair, a freelance photographer known for my love of the macabre. I have explored countless abandoned places, but none captured my imagination quite like Ravenswood Asylum, an eerie institution that had been shuttered for decades. Nestled in the heart of a dense forest, the asylum was infamous for its dark history, rumored experiments, and the whispers of tormented souls that echoed through its crumbling halls. One misty autumn afternoon, I decided to venture into Ravenswood, armed with my camera and a flashlight. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows as I approached the foreboding structure. The building loomed ahead, its Gothic architecture a haunting reminder of its past. Vines snaked up the walls, and broken windows stared down at me like hollow eyes. As I stepped through the decaying entrance, the air grew thick with dust and the scent of mildew. My heart raced with exhilaration as I captured the haunting beauty of the asylum through my lens. The walls were lined with peeling paint, and the remnants of forgotten lives lay scattered across the floor. I wandered through the empty corridors, snapping photos and whispering to myself, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. The deeper I ventured into the asylum, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Each creak of the floorboards echoed ominously, and I felt an unsettling chill wrap around me. In one of the dimly lit rooms, I stumbled upon a collection of old medical equipment, rusted and forgotten. An eerie sense of dread washed over me as I imagined the horrors that had taken place here. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thoughts, when suddenly I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I almost didn't catch it. "Help me." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was distant, yet filled with desperation. I glanced around the room, but it was empty. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed the sound, drawn deeper into the asylum. As I navigated the winding halls, the whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls. "Help us! Find us!" The voices were a chorus of sorrow, intertwining like a haunting melody. I felt compelled to follow, my curiosity outweighing my fear. I turned a corner and entered what appeared to be a patient's room. The walls were covered in disturbing scribbles, rambling thoughts of a mind long lost. In the center of the room stood a small, tattered armchair, and beside it lay a diary, its pages yellowed with age. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and began to read. The diary belonged to a patient named Clara, who had been committed to Ravenswood after a series of traumatic events. Her entries detailed the torment she endured at the hands of the staff, the isolation, and the whispers that drove her to madness. My heart ached for her as I read her final entry. They say the asylum is alive, that it feeds on our despair. I can hear the whispers calling for help, but no one will listen. I fear I may never leave this place. Just as I finished reading, the whispers intensified, swirling around me like a tempest. Clara's voice emerged from the cacophony, pleading, "Help us, please!" Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I could see my breath in the air. The armchair began to rock gently, as if someone unseen had taken a seat. I stumbled back, my heart racing. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. The whispers seemed to coalesce, forming a singular voice. "Free us. Find the truth." I felt a surge of determination. Clara's words echoed in my mind, urging me to uncover the asylum's secrets. I left the room, clutching the diary tightly, and continued to follow the whispers, my camera ready to document whatever lay ahead. The voices led me to a staircase spiraling down into darkness. I hesitated, the oppressive atmosphere thickening around me, but the urgency in their pleas pushed me forward. With each step, the whispers grew louder, a symphony of voices guiding me deeper into the abyss. At the bottoms of the stairs, I found myself in a long-forgotten basement, the air stale and suffocating. The walls were lined with old cells, each door rusted shut. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and just as I turned to leave, I noticed a faint light flickering in one of the cells. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding. The light pulsed rhythmically, illuminating a figure in the corner, a woman, her face pale and gaunt, staring at the ground. "Clara?" I whispered, hope flooding my chest. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear and sorrow. "You must help me," she begged, her voice trembling. "The truth, it must be revealed." "What happened here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They experimented on us," she replied, her voice breaking. "They believed they could cure madness, but they only created more suffering. I was one of the lucky ones who survived, but I couldn't escape. The others, they still linger." I felt a wave of compassion wash over me. "I'll help you," I promised. "I'll uncover the truth and make sure your story is told." As I spoke, the light flickered violently, and I felt the temperature drop even further. The whispers turned frantic, echoing off the walls. "The truth. Find the truth." Suddenly, the ground shook, and the walls began to crack. I grabbed Clara's hand, and together, we moved toward the light. "We must go," I urged, and with one final push, we burst through the cell door and back into the corridor. But as we ran, the whispers turned to screams, a cacophony of despair. "Don't leave us! Don't abandon us!" Tears streamed down my face as I struggled to make my way back to the stairs. "I won't abandon you," I shouted, but I could feel the darkness closing in around us. Finally, we reached the staircase, and with a burst of adrenaline, I sprinted up the steps, dragging Clara behind me. The voices screamed louder, but I focused on the light above, the hope of escape. As we emerged into the main hall, the whispers faded into a distant wail. I turned back to look for Clara, but she was gone. Panic surged within me, and I felt a deep sense of loss. "Clara!" I called, but the only response was silence. Determined to honor her memory, I clutched the diary and made my way outside, the cool night air washing over me. I knew what I had to do. I would expose the truth of Ravenswood Asylum, the dark legacy that had trapped so many souls within its walls. In the following weeks, I pored over Clara's diary, researching the asylum's history and uncovering the heinous experiments conducted within. I reached out to historians and local journalists, determined to shine a light on the atrocities that had taken place in Ravenswood. When I finally published the story, it sent shockwaves through the community. Ravenswood became a symbol of the need for change in mental health care, a reminder of the past that could not be forgotten. The asylum was set to be demolished, and a memorial was proposed to honor the spirits that had suffered within its walls. As I stood before the old building one last time, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The whispers that had haunted me were now echoes of hope. I had given a voice to the voiceless, and in doing so, I had freed Clara and the others from their torment. And as I turned to leave, I felt a gentle breeze brush against my cheek, a soft whisper carried on the wind. Thank you. My name is Samara Hale, a 29-year-old botanist with a fascination for the unexplained. I spent most of my days studying rare plants in the dense forests surrounding Hollow Creek, a small town known for its lush greenery and the peculiar legends that seemed to cling to it. Among these tales, none were as chilling as the story of the Lantern of Hollow Creek, a ghostly light that was said to guide lost souls through the woods, but often led them to their doom instead. According to local lore, the lantern was the spirit of a woman named Eliza, who had vanished in the forest over a century ago. Some claimed she was searching for her missing child, while others whispered that she was seeking revenge on those who wronged her. Intrigued and a little skeptical, I decided to delve deeper into the legend, hoping to uncover the truth behind the elusive light. One crisp autumn evening, I ventured into the woods, determined to find the lantern before the sun set. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the fiery sky. I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension as I followed a narrow path deeper into the forest, my heart racing with the thrill of the unknown. As I walked, I took notes on the flora around me, but the deeper I went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The rustling leaves and distant calls of wildlife faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. I paused, glancing around, the hairs on my neck standing on end. Was it just my imagination, or did I feel a presence lurking among the trees? Pushing the thought aside, I continued on my quest, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Casting long shadows across the forest floor, I saw it, a faint glow flickering in the distance. My heart leaped in my chest. Was this the lantern? I quickened my pace, excitement propelling me forward. The light danced and swayed, leading me down a narrow trail that twisted deeper into the woods. As I followed, the air grew colder, and the glow seemed to pulse, beckoning me closer. I couldn't help but feel drawn to it, an inexplicable force guiding my steps. Suddenly, the path opened into a small clearing. In the center stood an ancient well, its stones worn and covered in moss. The lantern's light flickered above it, illuminating the area with a ghostly glow. I approached cautiously, peering into the depths of the well. The light flickered again, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence answered me, thick and heavy. "Is anyone there?" The light dimmed, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure hovering above the well, a woman in a flowing white dress, her hair cascading around her like a veil. My heart raced as the figure slowly turned to face me, her face obscured by shadows. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing like a distant memory. "Please, help me find my child." I took a step back, fear gripping me. "Eliza? I stammered, unsure if I was truly witnessing the spirit of the woman from the legends. Her form shimmered, the lantern flickering in response as she extended her hand toward me. "Please," she implored, her voice a haunting melody. "I cannot rest until I find what was taken from me." A wave of empathy washed over me. I couldn't turn away from her anguish. "What happened to your child?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through my veins. "The townsfolk," she began, her voice trembling with pain. "They took him from me. They said I was a witch, that I had cursed the land. They burned my home, and in the chaos, I lost him. I have searched for him ever since." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I absorbed her story. The injustice, the grief, it was palpable. "I'll help you find him," I promised, my voice fierce with determination. "I won't let your story end like this." With that, the lantern brightened, illuminating the clearing as Eliza's spirit seemed to regain some of her strength. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Follow the path of the moonlight. It will guide you to the truth." As I turned to leave, the lantern's light grew brighter, revealing a faint path that cut through the trees. I followed the illuminated trail, my heart pounding with every step. The whispers of the forest seemed to swirl around me, urging me onward. The path led me deeper into the woods until I reached a small, overgrown clearing. At its center lay a weathered headstone, half buried in the underbrush. I approached cautiously, and as I brushed away the leaves and dirt, I gasped. The name etched into the stone was that of Eliza's child, William Hawthorne. I knelt down, my heart heavy with sorrow. "I found him, Eliza," I murmured, feeling the weight of the tragedy settle over me. "He's here." The lantern flickered again, illuminating the grave, and I felt Eliza's presence beside me. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Finally, I can be with him." In that moment, I understood. The lantern was not just a beacon of light. It was a bridge between two worlds, guiding lost souls to their final resting place. I closed my eyes, feeling a warmth envelop me, a sense of peace washing over the clearing. When I opened my eyes again, the lantern's glow began to fade, and Eliza's spirit appeared before me, more radiant than before. "You have given me the gift of closure," she said, her voice now filled with warmth. "Thank you, Samara. You have set us free." With that, the light extinguished, and Eliza's figure dissolved into a cascade of shimmering particles, filling the clearing with a gentle glow. I felt a wave of tranquility wash over me, and as I looked back at the headstone, I knew that both Eliza and William had finally found peace. As I made my way back through the woods, the world felt different, lighter somehow. The oppressive weight of the forest had lifted, and the silence that once felt heavy was now serene. I returned to Hollow Creek with a story of redemption, a tale of a mother's love transcending time and space. Months later, as I shared Eliza's story with the townsfolk, I could see the impact it had on them. The legend of the Lantern of Hollow Creek transformed from a tale of fear into one of hope and healing. The townspeople began to honor Eliza's memory, and in doing so, they also found a deeper understanding of the past, a past that no longer haunted the woods, but had become a part of its rich tapestry. And as I walked through the forests of Hollow Creek, I often felt a gentle breeze and a warm glow, knowing that the lantern still flickered softly, guiding lost souls toward the light. My name is Lila Prescott, a 30-year-old journalist with a penchant for uncovering the hidden stories of the past. After years of chasing tales in the bustling city, I found myself drawn to the sleepy town of Eldridge Hollow, known for its eerie legends and haunted history. The most notorious of these was Silver Birch Manor, a decaying estate that loomed on the outskirts of town, rumored to be cursed after a tragic event that took place over a century ago. The manor had once belonged to the affluent Hawthorne family, who mysteriously vanished one stormy night. Locals whispered that the spirits of the family still roamed the halls, seeking vengeance for their untimely demise. Intrigued by the tale, I decided to investigate the manor for a feature piece for the local newspaper. Armed with my notebook and a flashlight, I set out one foggy evening, ready to uncover the truth. As I approached the manor, the air grew thick with an unsettling energy. The grand entrance, once a symbol of opulence, now stood in disrepair, vines crawling up the cracked stone. I pushed open the heavy door, which creaked ominously, and stepped into the dimly lit foyer. Dust motes swirled in the air, and the scent of mildew permeated the space. The interior was a tapestry of forgotten elegance, faded wallpaper, tarnished chandeliers, and furniture draped in white sheets. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I steeled myself, reminding myself that I was here to uncover the truth. I pulled out my notebook and began to document my surroundings, capturing the essence of the manor. As I explored the ground floor, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. I moved to the grand staircase, its banister adorned with intricate carvings, and decided to ascend to the second floor. The hallway was lined with doors, each one shrouded in mystery. I opened the first door, revealing a dusty bedroom frozen in time. The bed was unmade, and a cracked mirror hung ominously above the dresser. I stepped inside, and suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, causing the door to slam shut behind me. "Hello?" I called out, my heart racing. No answer. Panic surged within me, but as I turned to open the door, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. There, in the reflection, stood a woman in a white gown, her long hair cascading down her back. She looked forlorn, her eyes filled with sorrow. Before I could react, the mirror rippled and the image faded. I stumbled back, my pulse pounding in my ears. Had I imagined it? I quickly left the room, desperate to shake off the feeling of dread. As I continued down the hallway, I heard a faint whisper, a melodic voice calling my name. "Lila, Lila." It was soft, yet enticing, pulling me toward the end of the corridor. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, my curiosity outweighing my fear. The final door swung open to reveal a nursery, its walls adorned with faded murals of woodland creatures. In the center of the room stood a small rocking chair, gently swaying back and forth as if someone had just been sitting there. I approached cautiously, and that's when I saw it. A small music box resting on a shelf, its delicate design captivating. I picked it up, and as I wound the key, a haunting lullaby filled the room. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a tempest. I felt a presence behind me and spun around, but no one was there. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath as the music played on, drawing me deeper into the nursery's embrace. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. I turned back to the music box, and the melody twisted into a dissonant tune, the notes becoming sharp and jarring. The rocking chair stopped, and the room darkened, shadows creeping along the walls. "Lila," the voice whispered again, now filled with urgency. "Help us." I felt a surge of determination. I couldn't let fear consume me. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice breaking the oppressive silence. The air shimmered, and the ghostly figure of the woman appeared before me, her face pale and etched with sorrow. "I am Eleanor Hawthorne," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the haunting lullaby. "I was trapped here, along with my family. We were betrayed by someone we trusted. Please, you must uncover the truth." The music box sprang to life again, its melody shifting to a sorrowful tune. I felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. "How can I help?" I asked, my heart racing. "What happened to you?" Eleanor pointed toward the window, her gaze distant. "Find the diary. It holds the key to our freedom. The truth lies within its pages. But beware. The darkness that binds us will not let go easily." Just as she finished speaking, the room shook, and the shadows surged forward, swirling around me like a living entity. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. "Where do I find the diary?" I cried out, my voice barely cutting through the chaos. Eleanor's figure flickered, her expression growing desperate. "The attic. It's hidden in the attic." Her form began to fade, the shadows closing in around her. "Hurry!" As the darkness threatened to engulf me, I dashed toward the door. I slammed into it, and with a primal scream, it burst open. I raced down the hallway, the shadows clawing at my heels, urging me to turn back. I wouldn't let them win. I climbed the staircase to the attic, the air thick with dust and despair. As I reached the top, I found myself in a cluttered space filled with forgotten treasures and cobwebs. My eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of the diary. Finally, I spotted an old trunk in the corner, its surface covered in dust. I rushed over and pried it open, revealing a collection of tattered papers and old photographs. My heart raced as I sifted through them, searching for the diary. And then I found it, a small, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. I opened it, and as I read the words scrawled in Eleanor's delicate handwriting, the truth began to unfold. The Hawthorne family had been betrayed by a trusted servant who had coveted their wealth, leading to their tragic demise in a fire that had engulfed the manor. Suddenly, the shadows surged into the attic, swirling around me like a tempest. I felt their cold grasp tightening, but I held the diary close. "You can't keep them here," I shouted, my voice ringing with newfound strength. "I know the truth." The shadows recoiled, and in that moment, I understood the truth was my weapon. I recited the words from the diary, recounting Eleanor's tale, her family's betrayal, and the injustice that had bound their souls to this place. The shadows writhed in agony, their grip loosening. With one final declaration, I shouted, "You're free. Your story will be told." The shadows shrieked, their cries echoing through the attic. And then, in a blinding flash of light, they dissipated, leaving only silence in their wake. I stood alone in the attic, clutching the diary, tears streaming down my cheeks. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted. I had freed Eleanor and her family, and in doing so, I had uncovered the truth that had long been buried. As I made my way back down the stairs, the once foreboding manor seemed to glow with warmth. The whispers that had haunted me were gone, replaced by a sense of peace. I stepped outside, the moon shining brightly above, illuminating the path ahead. In the following days, I wrote the story of Silver Birch Manor, detailing the haunting legacy of the Hawthorne family and the betrayal that had claimed their lives. The article resonated throughout Eldridge Hollow, shedding light on the forgotten tragedy. And as I looked back at the manor one last time, I felt a sense of closure. The spirits of the past had found their peace, and I had become their voice. I turned away, ready to embrace the next chapter of my life, knowing that the echoes of Silver Birch Manor would forever be etched in my heart. My name is Ethan, a 35-year-old graphic designer living in the bustling city of Asheville. I've always been drawn to the eerie and the mysterious, spending countless nights exploring abandoned places and delving into the supernatural. But nothing prepared me for what awaited me at my grandmother's old estate just outside of town. When my grandmother passed away last winter, I inherited her sprawling Victorian mansion, a structure that loomed over the landscape like a dark sentinel. It was filled with antiques, each piece telling a story, but it also carried a weight of sadness and secrets. I had fond memories of visiting as a child, playing hide-and-seek among the shadows. But now, as an adult, the house felt different, heavier, more foreboding. Determined to honor my grandmother's memory, I decided to spend a weekend there, sorting through her belongings and preparing the house for sale. As I arrived on that chilly Friday evening, the sky was painted in hues of purple and gray, a storm brewing on the horizon. I parked my car on the gravel driveway, the crunch of stones beneath my feet echoing in the silence. The moment I stepped inside, I was engulfed by a familiar scent, lavender and dust. The air was thick, as if the house had been holding its breath. I flicked on the lights, and the old chandelier flickered to life, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I could hear the creaking of the floorboards beneath me, a haunting welcome from the house itself. As I wandered through the rooms, I stumbled upon a large antique mirror in the parlor. It was ornate, with intricate carvings of vines and flowers surrounding the glass. I had always admired it as a child, but something about it now sent a chill down my spine. I approached cautiously, my reflection staring back at me. But the longer I looked, the more I felt an unsettling sensation, a whisper of movement just behind me. I turned quickly, but the room was empty. Shaking off the unease, I decided to unpack my things and settle in for the night. I made myself dinner and settled down on the worn-out couch with a book, the storm outside intensifying. The wind howled like a lost soul, rattling the windows. As night enveloped the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every creak of the house sent my heart racing, and the shadows seemed to dance just out of the corner of my eye. I finally decided to call it a night and headed to bed, the old mattress creaking beneath me as I drifted into a restless sleep. In the dead of night, I awoke to a soft sound, a faint melody, like a lullaby, drifting through the air. I sat up, straining to listen. The sound was coming from the parlor. Curiosity piqued. I slipped out of bed and tiptoed down the hall. The air was frigid, and I could see my breath as I moved. As I entered the parlor, the melody grew louder, swirling around me like a ghostly embrace. The mirror caught my eye once more, and I felt an irresistible urge to approach it. The reflection shimmered, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw the outline of a figure behind me. "Ethan?" The voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it resonated deep within me. I turned quickly, but the room was empty once again. I stepped closer to the mirror, my heart pounding. The melody stopped abruptly, and silence fell like a heavy blanket. Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled, revealing a scene I never expected to see. A younger version of my grandmother, her eyes bright and full of life. She was sitting in a rocking chair, knitting, surrounded by a warm glow. I gasped, stepping back. "Grandma?" I called out, but she didn't seem to hear me. The scene shifted, and I saw my grandmother standing in the parlor, her face filled with sorrow, looking directly at me. "Ethan, you must listen," she pleaded, her voice echoing through the glass. "The mirror holds the memories of our family, but it's also a gateway. Something dark has been awakened." I felt a chill creep up my spine as I tried to comprehend her words. "What do you mean?" I whispered, but the image faded, replaced by my own reflection staring back at me, wide-eyed and terrified. Before I could process what had happened, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the flickering candlelight. The shadows grew darker, and I could hear the whispers again, swirling around me in a chaotic chorus. "Ethan, help us," they cried. A mix of voices, some familiar, some not. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, knocking over a lamp, the glass shattering on the floor. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and I felt an overwhelming urge to flee. I dashed back to my room, slamming the door behind me and locking it tight. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. What had I stumbled upon? My grandmother's words echoed in my ears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Hours passed, but sleep wouldn't come. Finally, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a fitful slumber. The next morning, the sun streamed through the window, casting warm rays across the room. I awoke disoriented, unsure if the events of the night had been a dream. As I got up to make coffee, I glanced at my phone. No missed calls, no messages. I felt a twinge of relief, but decided to leave the house for a while. I spent the day exploring the nearby town, trying to clear my mind, but the image of my grandmother haunted me. I returned to the mansion as dusk fell, the shadows creeping back in. I needed answers. That evening, I gathered my courage and returned to the parlor. The mirror loomed before me, its surface calm and reflective. "If you're there, Grandma, please show me," I whispered, feeling foolish yet desperate. The air thickened, and the familiar melody began to play again. The mirror rippled, revealing a scene from the past, a family gathering in the very room I stood in. Laughter echoed, and I could see my grandmother, surrounded by relatives, all smiling and happy. But then, the atmosphere shifted, and I saw a dark figure lurking in the corner, watching. As the scene played out, I felt a pull, a connection to the figure. It was a shadowy entitled that seemed to drain the joy from the room. My grandmother's expression turned from joy to fear, and just as the gathering began to shatter, the image faded, plunging me back into darkness. "Ethan," the whisper returned, more urgent this time. "You must break the curse. The mirror binds us. You are the only one who can free us." The weight of her words settled over me like a shroud. I had to confront whatever darkness resided within this mirror. Gathering my resolve, I reached out and touched the cold surface. Suddenly, a jolt of energy surged through me, and the world twisted around me. I was pulled into the mirror, engulfed in a whirlwind of shadows and whispers. I could see my grandmother in the distance, her figure fading, calling out to me, "Find the heart of the darkness." With every ounce of strength, I fought against the swirling void until I found myself in a dark chamber. In the center stood a twisted, dark form, feeding off the memories trapped within the mirror. I recognized it. It was the shadowy figure I had seen before. "Release them," I shouted, my voice echoing through the chamber. The creature turned its gaze upon me, a void of emptiness, and I felt my courage waver. But then I remembered my grandmother, her love, and the memories of family that had been stolen. I focused on the warmth of those moments, the laughter, the love, and with everything I had, I charged toward the darkness. "You have no power here," I proclaimed, and in that instant, a brilliant light erupted from within me, pushing back against the shadow. The creature shrieked in rage as the light engulfed it, and with one final scream, it dissolved into nothingness. The chamber began to crumble, and I felt a tug, pulling me back through the mirror. I landed back in the parlor, gasping for breath. The mirror was still, the whispers gone. I approached cautiously, my heart racing. As I looked into the glass, I saw my reflection, but behind me stood my grandmother, radiant and free. She smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, her voice warm and loving. "The darkness is gone. You have freed us all." With that, she faded into a soft glow, leaving me alone in the parlor. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, and for the first time, the house felt alive again, filled with warmth and light. As I prepared to leave the mansion for the last time, I glanced back at the mirror. It was just a mirror now, devoid of any ominous energy. I smiled, knowing that my grandmother's spirit would always be with me. Driving away from the estate, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. The mansion would stand as a testament to my family's legacy, but now it was a place of love, not fear. And as I drove into the sunset, I knew that the echoes of my family would always resonate in my heart. I'm a traveling nurse, always on the move, hopping from one temporary assignment to the next. It's a lonely life, but I've gotten used to it. New hospitals, new towns, and endless nights in cramped, sterile apartments. That's why, when I found the little rental house on Pinewood Street, it felt like a miracle. It was small, tucked away on a quiet, tree-lined street in the outskirts of Savannah. The rent was cheap, almost suspiciously so, but I didn't care. After months of living out of suitcases, it felt like a place I could finally catch my breath. The landlord, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Carver, was polite but distant. She handed over the keys without much conversation, mentioning only that the house had been empty for years. I settled in quickly, making the place my own with some thrift store finds and a few houseplants. There were 3 bedrooms, but I only used one, turning the others into a makeshift office and storage. There was one room, though, at the end of the hall, that I never went into. It was locked when I moved in, and I figured it was just Mrs. Carver's storage, or maybe something broken that she hadn't bothered to fix. The first few weeks were blissfully uneventful. I'd come home after long shifts, collapse into bed, and sleep like the dead. But then, one night, I heard it. A faint tapping, like something lightly knocking against wood. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but it continued, rhythmic and deliberate. I followed the sound down the hallway, stopping in front of the locked door. The tapping was coming from inside. I tried the doorknob, but it was still locked. My first thought was, maybe a bird had gotten trapped inside. Or maybe a branch was knocking against the window. I shrugged it off and went back to bed, too tired to deal with it. The tapping continued every night, always around the same time, 2:13 a.m. I'd wake up to the sound, soft but persistent, echoing through the hallway. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the quirks of an old house. But the more I ignored it, the louder it seemed to get. One night, I had enough. I marched to the door with a screwdriver, determined to pry it open. As I started to work on the lock, the tapping stopped. I hesitated, my hands shaking. But after a moment of silence, I forced the door open. The room was small and empty, just 4 walls and a dusty floor. No birds, no branches, nothing that could have made the sound. But what struck me the most was the cold. The air in the room was icy, far colder than the rest of the house, and it carried a faint, sour smell that made my skin crawl. I quickly shut the door, telling myself I was being ridiculous. But the next night, the tapping returned, louder and more insistent. And then, it wasn't just tapping. It was whispers, faint and unintelligible, like someone trying to speak through a wall. I tried to record it on my phone, but the audio picked up nothing, just silence. But I could hear it, clear as day, a hushed, frantic whispering that filled the hallway. I called Mrs. Carver the next morning, asking if she knew anything about the room. There was a long pause on the other end before she sighed. "I suppose you should know," she said, her voice heavy with something like guilt. "The house used to belong to my brother. He was a writer, but he wasn't well. He would lock himself in that room for days, convinced that something was in there with him. He claimed it spoke to him, told him things. We all thought it was just his illness." She paused again, her voice cracking. "He died in that room. They said it was a heart attack, but he was so young." I felt a chill run down my spine as she continued. "I've tried to rent the house out so many times, but no one ever stays. They all hear things. It's like the house doesn't want anyone else there." That night, the whispers turned into screams. I woke up drenched in sweat, the sound piercing and relentless. It wasn't coming from the hallway anymore. It was right beside me, as if someone was standing over my bed, screaming directly into my ear. I bolted upright, my heart pounding, but the room was empty. The door at the end of the hall was wide open. I stumbled out of bed, reaching for my phone to call Mrs. Carver again, but it slipped from my hands as the temperature plummeted. My breath fogged the air, and the smell, the sour, decaying stench, was back, stronger than ever. I backed away, heart racing, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The house fell silent, the air still and heavy. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, every creak of the house sending me into a panic. By morning, I was done. I packed my things, throwing them haphazardly into my car. As I locked the front door for the last time, I glanced down the hall. The door at the end was ajar, the dark space beyond it somehow feeling like it was watching me leave. I never went back. I found another apartment in a crowded building, surrounded by noise and life. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me. I hear tapping sometimes, late at night, always around 2:13 a.m. It's faint, barely noticeable, but it's there, like a reminder that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. And every now and then, just as I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear the whispers. They're clearer now, almost like they're trying to tell me something, but I never listen long enough to understand. I don't want to know. I never believed in ghosts. I'm a rational person, a teacher by profession, living alone in a quiet suburb of Denver. I always thought that fear was just a trick of the mind, shadows in the dark playing tricks on our senses. That is, until last winter, when I moved into a new house. The place was old, built in the early 1900s, a Victorian-style home that creaked and groaned as if complaining about its age. But it was cheap, and I was desperate to get out of my apartment after the breakup. The landlord, an elderly man named Mr. Albright, was eager to rent it out quickly. He gave me the keys with a shaky smile, muttering something about how the house had been empty for years. Moving in was easy. I didn't have much, just a few boxes, some furniture, and my dog, Max. He was my only companion, a loyal German Shepherd who never left my side. But from the first night, things felt off. I remember it clearly. I was lying in bed, the house shrouded in a thick silence. Max was at my feet, his soft snoring the only sound in the room. Then, suddenly, I heard it. Footsteps. Faint, but unmistakable. They were coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. I froze, straining my ears, convinced I was imagining things. But the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate. They moved up and down the hallway, never coming closer, but never straying too far. I reached for my phone, its glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. 3:07 a.m. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking in the silence. No response. Just those steady, unnerving footsteps. Max lifted his head, ears perked. He stared at the door, his body tense, a low growl rumbling from his throat. I grabbed a baseball bat I kept by the bed, left over from my ex, and tiptoed to the door. My heart pounded as I flung it open. The hallway was empty. The footsteps stopped. I laughed nervously, blaming it on the house settling, and went back to bed. But the next night, it happened again. And the night after that. Every night at exactly 3:07 a.m., those footsteps would start, pacing the hallway like a restless spirit. After a week, I couldn't take it anymore. I set up cameras in the hallway, convinced that I'd catch some logical explanation. Maybe a raccoon in the walls or some other mundane cause. But when I reviewed the footage, there was nothing. Just me, peeking out, bat in hand, staring at an empty hallway. But the sound was there, clear and distinct on the audio. Footsteps echoing in the quiet. I started to dread nighttime. My teaching suffered. I was always tired, snapping at my students for the smallest things. Max, who had always been a cheerful dog, became nervous, often barking at the hallway as if seeing something I couldn't. One particularly cold night, I decided enough was enough. I called Mr. Albright, demanding answers. He was quiet on the other end, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "It's just an old house," he finally said, but his voice wavered. "I thought you didn't believe in ghosts." I didn't know what to say. He continued reluctantly. "There's a story about the house. A young woman named Abigail lived there in the 1930s. She was supposed to get married, but on the eve of her wedding, her fiancé disappeared. They say she paced the hallway, waiting for him to come back, until she eventually died of a broken heart." I hung up, feeling foolish for letting an old ghost story get to me. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that Mr. Albright was just trying to spook me. That night, I tried to sleep with the lights on, hoping the glow would keep whatever it was at bay. 3:07 a.m., the footsteps started again. Louder this time, almost impatient. Max whined, scratching at the bed, desperate to get away. I squeezed my eyes shut, clutching the sheets, counting the seconds until they would stop. But they didn't. They got closer. The sound was right outside my door. My heart hammered in my chest as I heard the doorknob rattle. I bolted upright, gripping the bat so hard my knuckles turned white. The door swung open, slowly, with a creak that echoed down the hallway. But no one was there. Just the empty hall, stretching into darkness. I stumbled to my feet, shaking. Max barked, his hackles raised as I took a step forward. That's when I saw it. A faint outline at the end of the hall, a woman in a long white dress. Her face was hidden in shadows, but I could feel her eyes on me, cold and hollow. I blinked, and she was gone. I don't remember much of what happened next. I grabbed Max and fled the house, not stopping until I was at a motel on the other side of town. I called Mr. Albright in the morning, telling him I was done. I didn't care about the lease or the deposit. I just wanted out. As I packed up my things, I found a small, dusty box in the attic, hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside were old letters, yellowed with age, addressed to Abigail. They were from her fiancé, dated weeks after he had supposedly disappeared. Each one was a desperate plea, begging for forgiveness, explaining that he had been called away on business and would return soon. He never did. I don't know if Abigail ever read those letters, or if she spent the rest of her life waiting for someone who was never coming back. But as I left the house for the last time, I could almost hear the faint echo of footsteps behind me, a relentless reminder of a love that never faded. I moved into a new apartment after that, a small modern place with no history and no creaky floors. Life went back to normal, or so I thought. But every now and then, at exactly 3:07 a.m., I wake up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, pacing, waiting, forever searching for something lost in time. And I can't help but wonder if Abigail ever found what she was looking for, or if she's still out there, following me, forever trapped in her endless vigil.